Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the live stream. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to talk about accessibility and color contrast. If you're new here, hello, welcome. My name is Natalie MacLees. I'm founder of AAArdvark, an accessibility testing platform. And we're going to dig into this topic of color contrast, which is a little more complex and nuanced than you might expect at first. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So up on my screen, I have the WebAIM Million, which if you haven't heard of this, they've been doing it for 7 or 8 years at this point, I think, where WebAIM stands for Web Accessibility in Mind. They're a nonprofit organization that does work to improve the accessibility of the web. And this Million project, like I said, is one they've been doing for a few years now. They have a automated scanner type tool that can be used to scan a website. We'll actually look at it a little bit later in the stream. We'll look at their tool. It's called Wave. And they set up this project to take the top 1 million home pages. So I think that's the first important thing to understand, that they're not looking at websites. They're only looking at web pages. So they're looking at the top 1 million web pages in the world across the internet. They're looking at just the home page of each of those 1 million sites. And they run an accessibility scan, so just an automated scan, of course, because if you try to do manual testing on 1 million pages, that would be pretty difficult to find enough people to do all of that work. That's a lot of manual work. So just an automated scan across the top million pages, and then they figure out what we can learn as a result of those 1 million scans. And they compile all of that into a report. And this is the 2025 report. And I just noticed it came out March 31st of 2025, which means we should be due probably for the updated 2026 report any day now, probably. So that should be exciting. Usually you'll see quite a few posts and things across social media about that when the new WebAIM Million report comes out. It has shown the tiniest bit of progress in improving the accessibility of the web, but still shows some pretty discouraging results. So yes, so here's where they link out to their earlier analyses. Okay, so they've been doing it since 2019. So this will be the 7th year. And they talk about their, how they came up with their sample, their methodology. So an average of 51 errors per page. And then they look at trends for homepage complexity, which I think that was interesting, that they can show just the number of elements on homepages has been increasing over time. And this is the slightly discouraging number, is 94.8% of the homepages they scanned in those top million had detectable failures. So, like, again, this is only an automated test. So we're only testing for that small percentage of overall accessibility issues that can be found in an automated scan. So undoubtedly, there's a whole bunch more issues that we would uncover. That is an improved number. As discouraging as 94.8% of websites having accessibility issues that are detectable is, you could see that it improved from the year before. It was 95.9, and it was higher than that in the first years. Looks like they didn't say. So let's go back up to where they had the previous years. Let's look at the first year, because I think it was like 98 the first year they did it. So there's been, 97.8 the first year that they did it. So there has been the tiniest bit of improvement. But of course, we would like to see more. All right, let me jump down to, sorry for all the scrolling around here. Let me jump down to what we're talking about today, which is contrast. Okay, so this contrast section, so low contrast text, which is below the WCAG to AA threshold, which we'll look at exactly what that means in just a minute, was found on 79.1% of home pages. So it is the most common issue, and it has been the most common issue found across web pages in this survey from the very beginning. So every year that they've done it, all years, this is the most common issue across the web, which is why I thought it would make a really good topic to chat with you about today. Because obviously we're not doing it right. We're not getting it right. It's going wrong a lot of the time. So I thought we should talk about it and figure out what we need to know and what we can do. So I think it's too late to influence those 2026 numbers, since that report is probably coming out any day now, and they've undoubtedly been doing that testing over the past several months. But maybe the 2027 report, we could get a better number. All right, so we're going to talk about how we test for these contrast issues, what the actual requirements are, how to fix those problems while still maintaining some brand guidelines, because we do have some challenges in there. And then and then we'll take a look at the new updated requirement that's coming with WCAG 3. All right, so let's get started by diving into the actual guidelines. So we're not going to read this whole article. We've got 4 overall success criteria as part of WCAG that deal with color. So the first 3 that we'll look at are siblings, I guess we could say, and they're closely related. And then the 4th one is kind of a cousin. I'm just going to mention it today. We're not going to really dig into it. All right, so first up we have 1.4.3, which sets the minimum contrast required to meet WCAG AA requirements. So we can see that they call out large text as having a separate requirement from regular text. So large text can have a little bit less contrast on it than regular size text. And this gets a little bit confusing because, WCAG is old. The web changes really fast. WCAG 2 came out in 2009, I think. Yeah, so it's quite, in internet years, it's ancient. And we've had 2.1 and 2.2 since then, but 1.3 has been, 1.4.3 has been part of it from the beginning. And so the confusing thing, I think, that's in this, the font size requirements, let's start there, is that it was in points. Which, of course, if you've ever done any kind of print design, points is a very common way of specifying font sizes. And in fact, if you've just used, Microsoft Word, you're probably familiar with, it has a default, I think, of 16 points or 12 points or something like that. And we don't usually set web text in points anymore. And so the first thing we have to know is that what does that mean, points? Because we actually have 2 separate rules if we kind of dig in here. So large text is either 18-point text, which let me zoom in on this a little bit to make it bigger. So we have 18-point text counts as large text. Also, 14-point bold text counts as large text. So the complexity is increasing a little bit. And then we have different contrast ratios for the different sizes, one for large text and one for small text. So now we know what our definition of large text is. It's either 18 points or larger, or 14 points or larger if it's bold. But now we got to figure out what is a point and how does that relate to how we normally size text on a website. And they do have a little note down here that a point is 1.333 pixels. So I think it would probably be more helpful to most people to have these numbers. So our large text is 18.5 pixels or larger if it's bold, and 24 pixels or larger if it's regular weight. So now we have a better web rule, right? And of course, if you're using M's or REMs or other of the newer, more flexible CSS units for setting font size, know that those can always be figured out exactly how many pixels that is for the current display, right? So you can figure that out, and you might need to test a page, at a mobile screen size, at a tablet screen size, at a desktop screen size, because the font size often changes at those different screen sizes. So you might have to test at all those different screen sizes to figure out, is the text the right size? And then we have to make sure that it has the proper contrast ratio with the background. And I kind of missed where it told us what those were. Okay, so here it is up here, I guess, in this little box. So for regular size text, it needs to be at least 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio with a background. And if we have large text, that only needs a contrast ratio of 3 to 1. And I'll show you some tools for calculating what that ratio is to figure it out. It's just a math equation, and there's lots of tools that can do that for you. All right, so that's our first success criteria, 1.4.3, which is AA. Requires 4.5 to 1 for regular text, which now we know what that means, and 3 to 1 for large text. Let's look at our next one, which is 1.4.6, which is AAA contrast, which works very similarly to 1.4.3, so different rules for regular size text and large text. But now we have an enhanced contrast ratio. So to meet, for regular size text, we need at least a 7 to 1 contrast ratio to meet that. And if we have large text, then it's a 4.5 to 1. So it's the same as regular text at level A. So if you are building a site where you have, you want to be more accommodating to more different types of vision that people have, because there are so many different kinds of eyes out there and all different things that people can see and perceive, you might want to step up to meeting this contrast ratio. Instead, it's going to be more accommodating. I will tell you this 7 to 1 is pretty tough. That is a pretty high contrast. I think like full black and white is, I think, a 15. So it's about half of, just going full black and white. And it can be pretty challenging to meet because you're going to need a pretty light color on one hand and then a pretty dark color on the other hand. So any kind of midtones from the palette kind of get removed. But if it's body text, that should be pretty doable. Once you try to get into doing text over images and things like that, that one gets a little bit harder, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, our next sibling success criteria is 1.4.11, and this is the one I think that people forget about all the time. And this is for non-text contrast. So the other two, 1.4.3 and 1.4.6, both deal with text contrast. And 1.4.11 is AA again, and it actually deals with non-text. So what this says is that if we have some interactive elements on the page, so we have form fields, we have buttons, we have icons, and things like that, those must have at least a 3 to 1 ratio against whatever background they're up against. So I should be able to see the boundaries of a form field. For example, if I need to enter my name in a form field, I need to be able to see the form field. I need to be able to see where it is in order to be able to do that. And so this success criteria requires that have at least a 3-to-1 contrast ratio, which is pretty low, but a lot of websites still manage to fail this one, and have icons that are very light. If you have a rating icon of stars and those are yellow stars on a white background, that is likely not going to pass. So you have to be thoughtful about those. And they tell you cannot round them. So 2.999 to 1 does not meet 3-to-1. They're very quite strict about it. So we'll look at some examples of this one. So I thought they had something down here. So here we have a button where I can't see what the visual boundary of that button is. I can't tell like how far out from this button can I click. And then here we have one that has a boundary that I can. And again, form fields is another one. You want to make sure that this border that you have around form fields or other types of interactive elements is at least a 3-to-1 with the background. And here, this one, because we have this very dark background and we have a very light form field, that actually counts. We can see that boundary, so we can understand where that form field is. And then icons, everything applies. If we have custom form elements, we want to make sure that we can tell the difference between the different states and where the boundaries of those are. So this is one that people forget about a lot, but know that if you have interactive elements or icons that have meaning, you want to make sure that those are meeting at least a 3-to-1 contrast. Okay, so those three we'll call the siblings of color contrast requirements. And then they have a cousin that also deals with color, does not deal with color contrast, but I did want to mention it today. We're not going to dig into it at all. 1.4.1 control gives you some guidelines for use of color. So for example, if you have a list of 10 items and you want to say something like, oh, the fruits are in orange and the vegetables are in green, well, that's great if people can perceive orange and green, but if they can't, there has to be a secondary way for them to get that same information. So for people who can't perceive that color difference, maybe you want to add a little icon, like maybe we put a little apple icon in front of the fruits and we put a little carrot in front of the vegetables. So it's not that you can't use color to convey information. It's that if you do, you have to have a secondary way of conveying that same information. So either adding some kind of iconography, adding actual text on the screen. So you could, have apple and then in parentheses afterward, fruit. But you could still use the colors, but then you want to have the secondary way of conveying that information there as well. So I just wanted to touch on that one. It doesn't deal with color contrast at all, but it's the only other success criteria that talks about color. So let's go ahead and dig into using some of these tools and taking a look at some of the stuff that we have. All right, so if you do a web search for a accessibility contrast checker, this one is probably going to be in your top 2 or 3 results. It's been around forever. It's not the prettiest tool. You could definitely look around and find designers who have built much prettier looking tools. But this tool is actually really helpful. So you can just put in your foreground color, your background color, and then it will calculate your contrast ratio. It will tell you for normal size text at level AA and AAA, and for large text at AA and AAA, and it also tests those graphical elements. So it will test those for 3.1 to 1, or sorry, 3-to-1 rather. Okay. So keep in mind that if you are working on a website where you just have to meet AA, it's okay if we have like a case. Let's see. I want to make this lighter. There we go. So we can see, of course, those AA for normal text and AAA for large text are going to fail at the same point because they have the same value. So for example, this color, if I have a white background with this shade of blue, that passes AA, so that's perfectly fine if you're meeting AA. If you want to meet AAA, this one doesn't doesn't work. So you don't have to get all 5 passes here. It depends on what you're doing, right? And if I push it up a little higher, right, if I'm doing a little star icon or I'm doing a color around a form element, like this color contrast is fine. It passes it passes that requirement. So that's the only one I have to check if that's what I'm going to be using this color for. So I wanted to explain that because I've seen a lot of people come to this tool and they think that they have to get 5 passes before it's a color combo that they can use. But it really depends on what this color combo is for and which level of WCAG you're trying to meet. So I did want to talk about that because I've seen a lot of people make that mistake. And then we have another tool, the color contrast analyzer, and we can see that they're not American because they put a U in color. And this is actually a desktop tool, and I have it installed. So this is what it looks like. So we have this top section here is for the foreground color. And you see I have all different ways that I can specify that color, but I can also just click this dropper. And then I can go anywhere on my screen. Like I could test my own desktop software, right? I could test it. I can test anywhere on this site. So we'll test this header, for example. There we go. And now it's set that color. It looks like it's a very dark blue. And then here, this section here is for my background color. And again, I've got all different ways that I can set a color here, right? I can say hex or other. I can adjust these values, but easiest, I can just use this color dropper. So now I have their foreground color, their text, their background color, and it gives me this little sample preview of what it looks like. It tells me their contrast ratio is 13.4 to 1, which is going to meet a AAA for even regular size text. And then down here, does this scroll or resize? It's 212 for my screen. That's funny, and I can't scroll it, but it does give you the breakdown down here. So 1.4.3, 1.4.6, and you can barely see it down there if you have a larger monitor, I guess. 1.4.11, that's funny. I can't resize it and I can't scroll. So I guess you have to have kind of a big monitor to use this tool. I hadn't noticed that before, but of course I have my monitor adjusted for the stream to make the stream easier to see, to see what I'm looking at, easier to see. So normally I can fit that on my screen with no problem. My screen right now is only about 800 pixels tall, so it is quite short. But yeah, I'm surprised that I can't at least scroll. But anyway, this tool is also available. And we also have built in actually to Google Chrome. If we want to come in here and, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to resize that. Okay. So if we wanted to double check this blue text against this image here, one thing that we could do is highlight that text, and then we can inspect it down here, right? So you can right click on this and say inspect to open up this bottom panel. You can also, let's see, on Mac, it's Option Command I, and on Windows, I think it would be Control Option I. Don't quote me on that though. I haven't tried it on Windows in a hot minute. Or you can always right click anywhere on the page and say inspect, and it will open this panel. And then I can see over here in my CSS, actually, let me zoom in on this a little bit to make this bigger. So over here in my CSS, I can see here's my H2, and I have a color set on it. I can click that color, and you can see that because this is a background image, it's not able to get the background color. If I click somewhere else, which I'll do in a second, it can often figure out the contrast ratio on its own. But in this case, it's not able to. So you can see that I can open that and say, pick a background color, and I can go and sample somewhere on this image around, and I can only take one sample, but I can check. Okay, so that is a 3.2.4 contrast ratio, which would not pass for normal size text, but this text is quite large. So I think that is going to go ahead. I think that is going to go ahead and be okay because our font size, yes, is four rems. And if we switch over to computed and take a look at what that is, font size, it is almost 71 pixels. So that's definitely larger than the 24 pixels or so that it needs to be to qualify as large text according to WCAG. So we only need to meet a 3-to-1 ratio. So that actually passes, even though it looks like it's kind of close. It actually passes in that case. If it was regular size text, so if this little text, for example, down here was that color, that would not pass because that would be small text. So we can use this WebAIM color contrast checker. If you do a web search, you will find many others. They just do a simple calculation that tests the luminosity, basically, of the two colors and determines the contrast ratio between them. And this desktop software does the exact same thing. And this tool built into Google Chrome does the exact same thing. We can also, so now that I'm on this page, we can also use the Wave browser extension. So if I just click that, it's going to highlight several different things on the page and show me where I have color contrast issues. So it found 32 contrast errors. You can click them over here and it will highlight them on the page and help you figure out where those are. So that's another nice tool that we have for finding color contrast issues. So if you want, you can open up one of your own sites right now, give it a try. And if you want to let me know, you can put in the comments what contrast ratio kind of things you find, or if you find any issues on your site. Always interesting. It's always interesting to take a look and see. Now, ideally, when we have something like this, where we have text over an image and the sky part of this image, right, looks, it's pretty even color. We do have like this little cloud over here, but you have to keep in mind, let me go ahead and open this back up again. You have to keep in mind that not everybody's screen is going to be this size. So the text isn't always going to be over this exact part of the image. So you want to also make sure that you can use this resize tool that's built into Chrome and look at your text at different sizes, because you have to make sure at every size that it's going to be over a part of the image where it has sufficient contrast. And you also have to make sure that every part of the text has sufficient contrast with the background. So I showed you to take one sample, but you actually need to take samples around every letter at many different screen sizes and make sure that there's sufficient contrast there. So keep in mind, especially when you have text over a background image or a background gradient or something like that, exactly what part of the image that text is over is going to change at different screen sizes, right? So here it looks like, this is pretty close to a mobile size. We might have an issue with this white text over here at this screen size, where out here it looks like it probably passes and looks fine. But once that text starts intersecting with this really light part of the sky, then we potentially have some issues. And we might need to look at adjusting the image. We might have to look at using an overlay. We might have to look at using a text shadow on the text to help set it off from the background a little bit more. And of course, any of those style adjustments can be applied at only certain screen sizes, right? So if I wanted to have this look just like this for big screens, but once it got down to where it started to become a problem, maybe here I want to start putting some kind of a dark overlay over that background image so that the text stands out a little bit more. That's an option, so that I only have that overlay at these small sizes and not at the bigger sizes. So we have a lot of flexibility in how we can do this, and a lot of different ways that we can test it. All right, so let's talk about these tricky cases that automated checkers have a hard time checking. So we have the Wave checker. There's a variety of other browser add-ons. There's an IBM Accessibility Checker browser add-on. DeQ has an Axe browser add-on. And they all struggle. So all the automated checkers struggle with a handful of different cases for figuring out if there's sufficient contrast. So one of those cases is like this, where we have text over top of an image. So the automated checkers are not going to be able to actually take color samples from the background image and figure out if the text has sufficient contrast with the background. And they're definitely not going to be able to do that at different screen sizes. So that's something that has to be done manually. We'll also run into that problem if we use any kind of opacity. So if this text was, instead of it being 100% opaque, if it was 50% opaque, and it was laid over a solid color or an image or a gradient, an automated checker isn't going to be able to detect that for sure. And usually what the automated checkers do in that case is they'll flag it as something that requires manual review. They also won't be able to test if it's something that's absolutely positioned or has fixed position in CSS, because at different screen sizes, that automated checker can't guess which other content on the page that text is going to be on top of. And so that's something that you're going to have to check manually as well. If we use just a gradient instead of an image, that has the same issue. We often have a lot of issues with placeholder text in form fields, and the placeholder text in form fields can be helpful. So this is a bad example. So this page here is set up purposefully to be an inaccessible website example. So don't do anything that you see here because it's probably wrong. And this is a good example where these form fields don't have separate labels. They just have placeholder text in them. And placeholder text by default in most browsers is so light that it actually doesn't pass color contrast requirements. But then when we make it dark enough so that it does, it's really difficult to distinguish it from regular text. And it's hard to tell the difference between boxes that we've actually already typed answers into and which ones still just have the placeholder text. And this placeholder text looks kind of dark to me. So I think this has already been styled with CSS. But placeholder text is something that automated tools will often miss scanning and will miss when they're running a scan for color contrast. So you have to make sure that you manually check that placeholder text and make sure that it's got sufficient contrast. And of course, please always use an always visible label for your form fields instead of using just placeholder text. Also, when we have focus indicators, see how this page is doing for focus indicator. Okay. We still have wave here on this page. Let me refresh here. And okay, so we have browser default, looks like on a lot of things. And then, so that focus ring around elements, we need to make sure that that has a sufficient color contrast. So that needs a 3:1 contrast ratio. And there is a little bit of debate over, this is a good example site, I think, because it's a blue site. In most browsers, the default focus ring is blue. So if I go back here, so I'm focusing on this button right now. Oh, and it moved. Okay, that's not helpful. Let's try this one. Okay, so I'm focusing on this button right now, and there is a blue focus ring around it, but it's very difficult to see because the button is also blue. I've seen a lot of people say, if you're using the default focus indicator in the browser, you don't have to worry about it because users can adjust it on their own. But I think there's actually a lot of users who don't know that that's an option. And I can say, my website for Aardvark is a blue site, uses a lot of blue. And we actually got, and I had followed that advice and just left the default focus ring. And we actually got quite a few complaints that people couldn't see the focus ring. So I do think in cases like this, you may want to go in and touch up that focus ring so that it's a little bit more visible. So one of the easiest things to do, and let me go in here and I'll get this on my screen. Okay, so we can see the button up here and I can see my button styles down here. And if you didn't know this, this little HOV that's at the top of this panel, you can actually click this to trigger different states. So if you want to style the hover state of something, you can click this and now you can permanently see the hover state without having to put your mouse over it. Or you can see the focus state, which this button changes color, and then we have focus visible, which interesting, as a focus ring that is not blue, but we definitely saw a blue one, didn't we? Anyway, let's take a look here. So we can collapse this now so it's out of our way, and we can find on button focus the background, but what's our focus visible? Focus. Okay. I see the background color. So one thing we can do is say outline offset. I think I showed this before. 2 pixels, we can make it even a little bit bigger, 4 pixels. Oops, I lost my property name here. Outline offset of 4 pixels. And now you can see that that's bumped out from the button a little bit. And so now I just have to make sure that this focus ring has at least a 3:1 contrast ratio with the background. Whereas without that outline offset, that border is right up against the button. And so it has to have a 3:1 contrast ratio with the background of the page, but it also has to have a 3:1 contrast ratio with the button itself because it's touching the button. And so that can make things a little bit challenging. So this outline offset, where we can actually bump that outline out a little bit, can be really helpful for helping to make sure that that focus ring is more visible. So now I don't know why it's yellow when I look at the site tools and it's blue when I actually focus. There's something kind of weird going on. But anyway, you can see now that even though it's blue, I can still really easily see where it is because I put that 4 pixels of space between the button and the background instead of that blue being right up against the blue background of the button. So that's a really helpful thing. And most of your automated checkers are not going to be able to check your focus indicator and make sure that it's got sufficient contrast with the background. So that's something else that you have to double check. And then same thing with any kind of hover or active state. So, you know, if I unfocus that and hover the button, it changes color. It also changes color when it receives focus. So an automated tool is only going to look at the default state and not check those extra, you know, if you have a hover color, a focus color, an active color, you have to put the page, you have to get that link or button into all of those different states and test the color contrast of all of those different states. All right, so let's talk about my own tool for a second here. So we do have an automated scanner built in, and you can actually run three different scanners. You can choose which one you like. We have ACTS, we have HTML code sniffer, and we have the IBM accessibility checker. So this particular website, this is another practice website that is purposefully inaccessible called Discover Mercury at discovermercury.site. So again, if you go there, you'll see a lot of bad examples of what not to do. And if we go into the issues for this site and we take a look at color contrast, so I'm just going to look at 1.4.3, so just text contrast. And we see that we have 14 active instances of color contrast issues on this site. And we can take a scroll down and take a look at what those are. So this one you can see got flagged for needs manual review because this purple background is actually a gradient. So it wasn't able to detect if that was sufficient contrast or not. And then it separately flagged the mercury, which is a different color. And you can see all of these that are on this gradient background get flagged. So I did want to just quickly show the feature that we have in beta testing right now. You can opt into the beta. If you go into your site, and this is available on all accounts, even the free account, you go into the site settings for a site, and you can turn on our AI color contrast checker, and then save your updated settings. And then I can go ahead and run a scan on here again. So we'll run another automated scan. That'll take just a minute to run. And our AI color contrast checker is taking multiple samples of the background color around each letter of the text to determine at one specific screen size if all of the text has sufficient contrast with the background. And if it does, then it will go ahead and close that issue for you. So it's one less issue that you have to go and review manually. So if you are an Aardvark user and you didn't know about that feature, it is in opt-in beta right now. So we finished our scans. Let's go and see 1.3. So we had 14 active instances of this before, and now we only have 5. So 9 of them it was able to review for us and determine that those were actually passing. And on some websites, it only is going to close a couple. It just depends on your design. On other websites, it's going to close most of them. So you can see now it as all those other ones, so we can actually see the fixed ones. It was able to mark 9 of these as fixed because it was able to determine that that is sufficient contrast. So if you have a site where you're using gradients, background images, absolute positioning, fixed positioning, etc., and you want to save yourself a lot of time doing all that manual review of all those issues, go ahead and you can sign up for a free account, scan your homepage, and you can try out our AI color contrast checker to help reduce the number of those that need review. On some websites, that use a lot of gradients and opacity and things like that, it's literally thousands of issues like that get flagged. And there was one customer that we had who had thousands and thousands across a website because all of their text for some reason had opacity on it, but it was perfectly fine. It was against a plain white background. But of course, any automated checker they tried to use flagged all of it as needing manual review. So yeah, how helpful that is going to depend on your site and what design attributes you're using. But yeah, so I just wanted to demo that real quick because I think it's super helpful. And we have that, just built in to all of our accounts. All right. So let's talk about how different ways that we can actually fix these kind of color contrast issues that come up. So let's go back over to Discover Venus. And we have like this About Us text, for example, even though that's large text, that's nowhere near a 3-to-1 color contrast ratio. And so we would need to fix that. And fixing these kinds of things isn't always about just make it darker. Sometimes we have to be really creative because, we might have a case where for this, particular, it's a pretend company, but we'll say they have a very strict branding guidelines. And this shade of yellow is in their brand guidelines, and they want to make sure that they use it on their site. And they might not like the idea of making that text a lot darker. So let's actually grab, let me actually grab that contrast ratio so we can see exactly what it is that we're dealing with. So I open up the browser tools. I'm going to right click on that and inspect, and we have our H2. And over here, whoops, nope, I just want the H2, thank you. Okay, contrast ratio of 1.58. So this was a case where the Chrome developer tools were able to determine the background color, so I didn't have to sample it myself. So this contrast ratio is only 1.58. And this customer, they might not be super excited about the idea of making that color darker. So let me go ahead and grab this color and let's go ahead and put it in this. Oops, that's not, there it is. This color contrast checker. So our foreground color, the 1.58 contrast ratio, right? So one option I have is like, well, let's just make this darker, and it's large text, so it only has to meet a 3. So there. That color looks really different, right? And we might not be excited about having the headings be this color instead. So let's go take a look at what that might look like. Right, so that now meets color contrast, but now we might be saying, yeah, but that's That's not our brand though. And I don't like that. So uh, we have to get creative sometimes, and we have to think about like, what else could we do? What other thing could we try here? And one thing we could try is, can we bring that light gold color into the heading in another way? Could we add, could we have dark text, maybe a dark blue or a black or a dark gray text, and then have it have a text shadow that uses that pale gold color? Could we have it use the pale gold color? We could put like a little block of color next to the heading in that pale gold color. We could put a whole background of the pale gold color behind the headings. We could put an underline. We could put an overline. There's all different ways that we could adjust this and still bring in that brand color, but ensure that we have sufficient contrast. So sometimes it's just about getting creative. So I, for example, am working with somebody right now who, I want to open this up a little bit more. They have a brand color of orange, and we'll take a look at orange in a second. Orange is famously really challenging to meet color contrast, because you have to make it so dark that it's brown, basically, before you can put white text over it. But it's a brand color for them, and they don't want to let that go. But we don't have to necessarily change, this is a plain blue button, for example. If they have orange buttons on their site similar to this, we don't have to change those to blue buttons entirely. We can get creative with the design. Maybe their colors that they're working with are like a navy blue and then this bright orange. We could make the main part of the button navy blue and put an orange border or an orange design on one side of the button or on two sides of the button. There's all different ways that we could still keep the brand colors and apply a design that's going to let us still use the brand color, but in a different way that's going to allow us to keep that color contrast. So sometimes we just have to get a little bit creative with it, because just making the color darker to improve the contrast isn't always going to do it. Sometimes if you have text that's right on the border of being classified as large text, like sometimes you can just adjust the size and make it a little bit bigger. So now it only needs a 3-to-1 ratio instead of 4.5 to 1. So you can get really creative in how you resolve those issues and still adhere to brand guidelines and still, make the designers happy, make the marketing people happy, make the branding people happy. We have all kinds of creative solutions that we can apply and use to still use brand colors, but make sure that everyone is able to read our text and that people aren't squinting at the screen and really struggling to read what's written there. So we have lots of different options and lots of different ways that we can think about it. All right, so let's take a look at, let's see, where do I have that file? Oh, I think I don't have it open. Let's go over here. So there's a secret page on Discover Venus, buttons.html, which is going to give us some color contrast because there are some little quirky things that I wanted to talk about today. So one famous problem that we have is the medium blue problem. So if you look at these two buttons, there's like a 50-50 chance, right? This is the exact same color blue background, and we have it with white text and we have it with blue text. So it's like a 50-50 shot that you might think that the white text is actually more readable and has better contrast with the background. I feel that way about that particular one, but everybody's eyes are different. But you can see that the white on that blue actually fails the color contrast ratio. It's not enough contrast. It's only a 4.2. Now, in this case, that is very, very close. And I think that you could probably get away with just making that blue a tiny bit darker, and it would then pass. But there is a pretty well-known problem with this medium blue, where a lot of people prefer white text on it and like the way that looks, but it actually fails color contrast ratio. So you might have to make the blue a little bit darker, or like we said, you might need to bump up the font size on your buttons if you want to use this kind of button so that you only need a 3-to-1 ratio. So you can be creative about that and figure out how you want to resolve it. And then orange is famously really, really difficult to use in a design. If you want to use it as a background color or a text color, it's really difficult. So if you have to use orange as a brand color, sometimes it's best to think about how you can work that into the design as accents or as additions instead of as just full-on text or full-on background behind text. So regular text, depending on your eyes, of course, you might think that this white text on this brighter orange actually seems perfectly fine. You don't have any problem seeing that, but you can see that it is only a 3-to-1 contrast ratio, right? And the black text might feel like it blends in a little bit too much to these two orange colors. That might feel like it's actually less contrast to you, depending on your eyes. But you can see that the white is only a 2.94 on this color orange. It's only a 3 on this color orange. And the black actually passes AAA. It's at a 7. So it's a significantly higher in our calculation. And if we want to use white text on orange, we have to make it so dark, like I said, that it reads more as brown. And it really loses that kind of bright, vibrant feeling that orange often has. So that's a really common issue, a really common challenge that we have. We do have the color called Magic Gray, which is 767676. So Magic Gray is magic for a couple of reasons. Like number one, it passes contrast ratio with both black and white text. And number two, it is the lightest shade of gray that passes 4.5 contrast with white. So if you want to use it on a white background, it will pass. If you want to use it on a black background, it will pass. If you want to use it as a background with white text or a background with black text, that all passes. Now, everyone's eyes are different. When you look at these samples here, you might have your doubts about this black on 767676, but it is actually a 4.62 color contrast ratio, and it does pass. I personally find that a little bit difficult to read on this particular monitor, but it does pass. So the color contrast calculation is not perfect, which is why they're looking at introducing a new one for WCAG 3, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Red is another pretty challenging color. You can get a passing white text on red by making the red kind of dark. Now, if you're working with a brand that has a really bright red as part of their branding, that might get really challenging because you do have to make it darker. But I do feel like the red at least still looks red, where I feel like yellow and orange no longer look yellow and orange. They look like shades of brown by the time they're dark enough to use with red text. And even though both of these black on red pass, I think especially the bottom example here of the black text on the red, I think that's actually kind of difficult to read. I find that a lot harder to read than this one that's white text on the red background that actually fails because it's only a 3.99. And then green seems like it would be fine, but actually it fails. Like even this darker green here with the white text is only a 3.25 contrast ratio. So a regular size text, we would have to make that green significantly darker. And it explains this here because green has very high luminance. And that's the main thing that the current mathematical formula that calculates the contrast ratio is mainly using luminance, and the luminance on green is very high, which means that it's difficult to get a green that's dark enough that's still recognizable as green, but that works with white text. So if you have branding that involves green, you have to be really thoughtful about how you're implementing that green color throughout the design. Because if you're trying to put green text on a white background or white text over a green background, that's going to be a little bit tricky. And so that's something to definitely be aware of. Placeholder text. So we talked about this a little bit already. Of course, this our magic number is this. What was our magic number? Back up here, 767676, the magic gray. So 757575, just slightly darker, is going to pass for our placeholder text. So default placeholder text in most browsers fails color contrast. It won't get flagged for you in most accessibility scanners because they just aren't checking placeholder text. So you want to be aware of that and make sure that you are styling your placeholder text to make sure that it has enough contrast. And of course, just a reminder to never use placeholder text instead of actual labels, always visible labels for your form fields. Okay, so link color. So this is something that we forget about a lot of times, is that we have our links and we make them blue or, whatever color. We maybe use our brand color, or we use a color from the site color palette, and we only check it on a white background. And we forget that maybe some pages have a little gray box, or some pages have a blue box or a yellow box that might also have a link in it, and our link might not have sufficient contrast with that other background color. So keep in mind when you are setting a link color that it might be used on other backgrounds. And so you have to make sure that that it has sufficient contrast with wherever you use it, or you may need to do something where this blue is your default link color, but then when you have a call out box or an information box or something like that that might have a link in it, that maybe you have a darker shade of blue that you actually apply for the links in that particular case. All right, so let's now talk about this updated color contrast calculation that's coming with WCAG 3. It is called APCA. I don't know if people are saying like APCA or APCA or something. I haven't heard anybody actually say it, but APCA, it stands for Advanced Perceptual Contrast Algorithm. And it gives a score on a scale of 0 to 100 instead of the strict color contrast ratio. And the higher the number, the more contrast that we have. It is a big change because it factors in a few different things. So it takes into account the size of the text. It also takes into account the weight of the text. And then it's also like if we come over here to the current, the WCAG 2 color contrast calculator, it doesn't matter really, like if I have the yellow color here or here, and these two colors could be reversed, and the contrast ratio that it calculates is going to be exactly the same. So one thing that's new with the APCA, and there's actually a website here, I'll share these links out, that can help you calculate it. If we swap these, so you can see right now the color contrast is 75.6. If I swap those two colors, I actually get a different contrast ratio. So it actually matters which color is the foreground and which color is the background, because this calculation actually takes into account that when I have a lighter color on a darker color background, it appears lighter for a lot of people's eyes. So let's go back up here and we'll take a look at each of these examples with the WCAG 3. So our what was previously a 4.221 ratio that failed at AA, for WCAG 3, that would actually pass for normal size text because we're taking into account that it's white, lighter colored text on a darker background. So it's not symmetrical the way that the current color contrast is, right? The current color contrast just takes two colors, calculates the luminosity difference between them, and it doesn't matter which one was foreground and which one was background. APCA actually takes into account like which one is foreground and which one is background, and applies slightly different rules. All right, and in this case, the black that passes for WCAG 2 would actually fail in WCAG 3. So I think that's a really interesting difference, that these actually are going to swap out and that calculation is different enough that that's going to change how the blue problem, the medium blue problem gets resolved. So our orange dilemma, let's take a look at this one. So with this shade of orange here, when we put white text on it, that fails WCAG 2. And this would pass WCAG 3 for large text. So this would even fail WCAG 2. Like technically it's real close, but it would fail WCAG 2 even for large text. But this one would actually pass for large text, and the black would pass. This one here, this 7.5, that one would pass for even regular size text. So that one doesn't really change. This one actually does change. It does get a pass as long as it's large text. And then let's look at our magical number, because this is our magical gray, because this one is actually interesting. So 767676, good for white, good for black, and is the lightest gray that works with a white background or white text. And while we can see that putting our magical gray on a white background passes AA, I mean, it just passes, but it passes, it would actually fail WCAG 3. So that would actually fail. So this one would fail. If it gets used the other way around, if we put white on it, that passes. So that's where we see that that calculation is no longer symmetrical. It matters which color is the foreground and which color is the background. So even though it's the exact same two colors, that calculation is going to change a little bit. And let's see, I think that was the green one. Let's take a look at how green is going to change with WCAG 3. So this one up here, that was a 2.3 to 1 with white text. And I agree, that one is a little bit rough on the eyes. It's a little bit too close. It fails AA, it still fails WCAG 3. Our 3.25 to 1, so this one here, this fails AA. It still fails AAA. I'm sorry, it still fails WCAG 3. I'm getting confused between WCAG 3 and AAA. All right, it still fails WCAG 3, but it would pass for large text, which that would also pass WCAG 2 for large text. And then if we look at, that we don't have an actual example here, but the 5.14 to 1 would pass. So we would be able to get a green that actually is recognizable as green that we could put white text over for WCAG 3 without it being so dark that we don't really recognize it as green any longer. But even with the WCAG 3 calculation, green is still going to be a tough one. And, it's just the nature of the color green. So green is still going to be a tough brand color to deal with in designs, and you're going to have to continue being creative. But we're going to get a little more leeway on some of the others, on some of the oranges and blues and things like that are kind of frustrating right now. They're going to work a little bit differently in WCAG 3. Now, reality check on that timeline, because WCAG 3 is years away from being a formal recommendation, probably at least 3 to 5 years out. So don't use the APCA calculation and think that you're good if it passes, because you are still failing WCAG 2, which is the current recommendation. So you want to be aware of that. I've had a few people ask me if we could switch Aardvark to using the APCA contrast calculation, but of course we can't, because people are counting on us to make sure that they're passing WCAG 2, right? And I can't mislead them and give them a different contrast ratio that's associated with WCAG 3. So be aware of that. You can't quite use it yet, but it's nice to know the rules, and it's nice to have a tool like this that you can experiment with and get a good idea of what's coming. So this is just apcacontrast.com if you want to come here and play around with it and get a feeling for what the changes might look like. And if you are dealing with a particularly rough branding guideline right now where you're having a lot of trouble, like, you might want to pop over here and check and see, like, in a couple of years, is my situation going to improve? And am I going to be able to use this orange for my buttons? You could definitely check it out. But like I said, don't right now, WCAG 2 is the standard. So don't think that you can switch to using this instead right now. We're still stuck with the current calculation, and it's got a few limitations, but it does work pretty well for most people's eyes and does give us a pretty good representation of what most people are going to be able to perceive. All right, so that's it for today. If you haven't been around before, I do a live stream every other Wednesday afternoon. The topic changes. It's always related to accessibility, and I just try to share some information and help you get up to speed on different aspects of accessibility. I don't know what the topic for the next one will be, but it'll be 2 weeks from today. And I will be sure to post that on our Facebook, our LinkedIn, and our YouTube channel so that you'll know when that's coming up and be able to join in. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you are having beautiful springtime weather wherever you are, unless you're in the Southern Hemisphere, in which case I hope it's a beautiful autumn day and you're having a pumpkin spice latte. All right. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.